All right, greetings and welcome everyone. My name is Asad Ali Jafri. I'm the Executive Director here at the South Asia Institute. Welcome to our space in Chicago. We're located in the historic Prairie District of Chicago's near South Side. Although this building that we're in was built in 1911 and is a registered national landmark, we just opened up our doors as the South Asia Institute about a year ago. So we're very new and we're thankful that you're here and you're joining us. So thank you to all of you and thank you to Creative Mornings. The South Asia Institute, or SAI for short, is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we cultivate the arts and culture of South Asia and the diaspora. We collaborate locally and globally to engage diverse communities in creative, cultural experiences, support artistic production by emerging and established artists, and foster cultural appreciation for the South Asian diaspora. I'm really excited today because we do a lot of things here. We have performance, music, literature, film, and of course, visual art. And today I'm gonna walk you through our current exhibition, Old Traditions, New Narratives, South Asian Miniatures. This exhibition has over 100 artworks from more than 25 artists. And for the next 40 minutes, we'll be talking to you about the exhibition, about the significant artists, about the works themselves. You'll get to spend a decent amount of time with the art. And I'm sure you'll have questions afterwards. So we will have 15 minutes to answer those questions as well. If you have a question, please use the chat function. You can put question in capitals and then just enter in your question. We'll answer as many as we can at the end. We also have a special treat for you today because we have the founders of South Asia Institute with us, Drs. Shireen Ahmad and Dr. Afzal Ahmad. And they're gonna walk you through the exhibition, highlight some of the works they find the most interesting, and give you a bit of a background for both the traditional and the contemporary miniature art movements. Dr. Afzal Ahmad is a board-certified ophthalmologist, and after completing his fellowship from Harvard Medical School, he built a successful practice in the Chicagoland suburbs. Dr. Afzal has extensive experience with launching charitable organizations, including the Hundal Foundation, Hamdard Center, and the Citizens Foundation. His strong love of his cultural heritage, collecting art, and a desire to share the collection on a larger scale led to the creation of the South Asia Institute. Dr. Shireen Ahmad is a professor of anesthesiology at Northwestern University. She and her husband Afzal have been collecting art since the early 1970s and have one of the largest collections of South Asian art. She has a strong interest in art and has studied it extensively over the past 45 years. The creation of the South Asia Institute has been a long-term dream of hers to share and educate the public about her cultural heritage. So again, we are going to have 40 minutes of this tour, maybe 35 now. And we're gonna have 15 to 20 minutes left at the end to make sure that we can take as many questions as possible. I'm gonna walk you through some of the gallery space. You'll see some art. We will screen share and get really up close and personal with some of the art as well. And right now, I'm going to pass it over to Afzal, one of our founders, who's gonna talk to you a little bit about the tradition of miniature art painting and this exhibition as a whole. So over to you, Afzal.
Thank you. For this introduction. Good creative morning to you all from Chicago, where it's about a little past 11 a.m. and very warm welcome to everyone participating in this Zoom session. Today, we are going to be talking about our present exhibit that went on display about 2 weeks ago. And this exhibit traces the progression of miniature art from Mughal period to the present time, a span of almost 500 years. This encyclopedic exhibit about South Asian miniature art covers different art time periods and different styles. To our knowledge, this is the first time we will see such an extensive variety of miniatures on display under one roof. Before we delve into the details of the exhibit, let us define what a miniature is, since there's a lot of confusion about it. The word miniature is used in our present colloquial language to mean something small. But soon you will see in this exhibit that this artwork can be fairly large. The word miniature, if you look at the root, it comes from the Latin word miniere, meaning to color with red lead paint, called a minium. And this was the color that was very pronounced and very popular in early Christian iconography and books in the Orthodox Church. Remember, the word miniature was given to these South Asian paintings by British colonizers of the Indian subcontinent or South Asia, since most of them were small in size. During Mughal times, the language most commonly spoken in the courts by the officials was Persian. In Persian, these paintings were called tasvir. Miniature is also a name given to work that have been made in a particular South Asian classical technique with natural dyes, handmade paper, and squirrel hair brushes. Very few producers of these images use this technique in the present day. We will discuss this old technique and the newer versions of making the miniatures later on. Despite all these different descriptions and controversy about what a miniature is, the name miniature still is ubiquitous for the lack of a better word. I would like to talk to you a little bit more about the traditional Mughal miniature. Art of painting has existed in South Asia prior to Mughals in the form of Pala, Chola, and Buddhist art. What is really striking is that all forms of art, especially miniature art, really took off during the reign of second Mughal emperor, Humayun, who ruled between 1530 and 1556. He had to go into exile to Persia for a few years after losing the crown to another warrior from Afghanistan called Sher Shah Suri, the builder of the Grand Trunk Road, which is so famous in the northern part of India. But upon his return from Persia, he brought with him two very famous Persian painters, Mir Sayyid Ali and Abdus Samad. And these two people were very instrumental in setting up royal ateliers of hundreds of painters that would document imperial events like court scenes, hunting safaris, battles, and different historical myths. After Humayun, Emperor Akbar took all forms of art to a much higher level. Akbar was an intelligent, organized, broad-minded, and a fair ruler. During his almost 50 years of rule, he encouraged not only Muslim-themed art, but Christian and Hindu-themed art. And a lot of the Christian missionaries from Europe visited his court and were guests at his courts also. And he copied some of these Christian art into the Mughal art. This upward trajectory continued for another 100 years during other Mughal emperors like Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb. Here are two good examples of Mughal miniature. The first one, which is about 12 inches by 9 inches in dimension, details the life story of Joseph, who in Islam is considered a prophet, and Zuleikha, who used to be the daughter of a general in Pharaoh's army in old Egypt. And this is the depiction when Zuleikha invites all her girlfriends to introduce Joseph to him. And the story goes that every invitee was given an apple and a knife. And by seeing Joseph and how beautiful he was, instead of cutting the apple, they cut their fingers. So the story goes. The second one depicts a Sufi saint with a few women in it. Similarly, this also about the same size and shows similar bright colors and exquisite detail. And this is like a religious session going on between the Sufi and the women who are learning the religious text. When you look at these and other Mughal miniatures, they're very bold, bright, and colorful. They're very realistic, unlike earlier Persian paintings, and the images of the subjects are very lifelike. These work also have a very delicate lines preferred by Persian painters. The borders are highly decorative and very elaborate. Now, with the decline of Mughal Empire in the 18th and 19th century, the patronage and the support gradually disappeared. And these artists found employment in other Muslim, Sikh, and Hindu courts along the way, adapting their art to the local condition with some variations in style and subject matter. Some of the other styles that emerged were Kangra style, which was a kingdom northwest part of Punjab, and was ruled by Sikhs mainly. Then Pahadi, also Rajput kingdom, there was a Sikh variety of this miniature painting, and Bengal variety on the east part of the country. With the rise of British hegemony in South Asia around 18th century and early 19th century, the trajectory of Mughal miniature saw a downward trend. British looked down upon these miniature paintings and were more interested in documenting the South Asian people, the flora, the fauna, and the landscape that they came across, which was alien to them. They patronized these same miniature painters to paint these motifs that today are called the company paintings. And here on the screen, you will see a few good examples of company paintings. This so-called art of company paintings ultimately lost its footing due to the invention of the photography, and once it took a stronger hold in the country for documenting purposes.
Thank you, Afzal, for that great intro on miniature painting, on this exhibition, and upon the traditional kind of elements of miniature painting. And I'm sure some of you are thinking like, okay, I get it. It's not a miniature painting just because it's small, although of course names and things that you name end up taking a life of their own. I now we've called this old traditions, new narratives. So we've talked a little bit about the old traditions. We're now gonna get into the new narratives and talk a little bit about what happens with the revival of the miniature art movement. And for that, we're gonna talk about a few of the critical people, a few of the iconic artists, and what we're calling the trailblazers. So why don't we go over to Shireen now and have her talk to us a little bit about that and what's happened in the 20th and the 21st century with miniature painting.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, virtually for now, but very soon in person, I hope. Afzal just told you about the decline in miniature art and the arrival of the colonists, but all was not lost. And as you'll see today, the art form was not only revived, but it was also re-energized. The first artist that I want to talk to you about when we consider how this art was revived is Abdulrahman Thai. And we're going to share one of the works that's in this exhibition, one of his paintings. There's an important reason why he's in this exhibition. Iftikhar Dadi from Cornell credits him with being the first artist to revive the Mughal miniature style. And he had a very distinct style. He used watercolors on paper. They were soft, meditative colors with bold, flowing lines. Now, after high school, Chughtai joined the Mayo School of Art in Lahore. And the vice principal there was a gentleman named Gupta, who had been a student of Abanindranath Tagore. Tagore was the leader of the nationalist Bengal School of Art, which was a movement that encouraged the painting in the traditional Mughal style. And in 1916, Chughtai himself went to Calcutta to study photography. And there he met the Tagores. And Partha Mitter, the well-known British art historian at Oxford, is of the opinion that the Tagores instilled the spirit of nationalism in Chughtai and encouraged him to revive the traditional art in his work. There's a great similarity when you look at the paintings of Tagore and Chughtai, and they actually even painted similar scenes. Now, the next person who played a major role in this revival was Bashir Ahmad. The British had established craft schools in the major cities in India to train local craftsmen to produce the beautiful Indian items that were in great demand in Britain. And in Lahore, they established the Mayo School of Industrial Art, which was later named the National College of Art, or NCA as we like to refer to it. Now there, miniature art was taught by two great classical miniaturists. There was Haji Sharif, who was followed by Sheikh Shuja'allah. But it was not a very popular subject. But there was one student who took a serious interest, and that was Bashir Ahmad. And so when Shujaullah retired, Bashir was chosen to be his successor. And the chair of the fine art department at that time was the modernist Zahur al-Akhlaq. And Zahur had encountered these traditional miniatures at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London when he was studying at the Royal College. And he felt that this art form needed to be revived and needed to be taught at the NCA. And he convinced Bashir to establish a program. Now, Bashir was a strict traditionalist. And as you see from his work that's in this exhibition, but it was Zahur who proposed the fresh vocabulary that resonated with the younger generation of miniature artists. They were not content with just making copies of traditional works. And it was the work of some of these early students of his that got this neo-miniature movement going. Now, in the first section, we have the works of some of the neo-miniaturists. And these are the young artists that we like to refer to as the trailblazers. Shazia Sikandar is probably the trailblazer. And so we want to start with her. She had never meant to study art. She was a math major, but she was involved in the women's rights movement in Lahore in the 80s. And she encountered the artist activist Lala Rukh. In fact, Lala and Shazia would make signs and banners for the demonstrations in Lala's backyard. And it was Lala who convinced Shazia to join the NCA. After graduating from the NCA, she came to the United States and she received her MFA from RISD. And she now lives and works in New York. Her works are found in major museums in the world. And she's the first Asian woman to be exhibited at the National Gallery. In fact, the series of works that you see behind me is a part of that series. Shazia draws from her training in miniature style, but she fuses it with a minimalist abstraction and adds her own personal and cultural narratives. She also experiments with sculpture and video projection and digital animation. Now, we're going to show you one of the works that's in the exhibition, and this is titled Mirror Plane. It's a double image. It's surrounded by flowers and abstract writing and hands and fists. One hand is open in the universal gesture of charity, and the other one, the fingers are touching to form a circle, which is a symbol of wholeness or connectedness in many cultures. The other one that we have in this exhibition is titled Malign Monsters. In her paintings, Sikandar seeks to bring the traditional images of the East into conversation with Western contemporary art. And here she has paired a Hindu female figure with a classical Western figure. The title of the work is actually a reference to a text by the British historian Partha Mithra. The book is titled Much Maligned Monsters, The History of European Reactions to Indian Art. And it's a book in which he discusses the cultural bias towards Indian sculpture and architecture in the West. Now, we're going to move on to another artist in this exhibition, and that's Imran Qureshi. Imran is another graduate of the NCA, and he now teaches there and plays a major role in spearheading the revolutionary miniature art movement. I'd like to share one of his early works with you first. And in this work, his Basholi botanic motives are derived from the traditional Pahari and Kangra works that Afzal was mentioning. The grid that you see is a reference to the first stage of creating the traditional miniature, where the artist actually creates a grid, usually with pinholes, to establish proportions and layout. The work behind me is titled Love Me Not. In 2010, Imran witnessed a bombing near his home, and it resulted in several deaths. And he was very disturbed by what he had seen, and his artwork changed dramatically after that. He's known for these dramatic, violent images. They suggest splashes of blood, but on closer examination, they actually consist of complex patterns of elaborate stylized flowers. The dualities reflect the rivalry between beauty and violence, life and death, energy and peace that surrounds him. Now, he's used this imagery in numerous installations worldwide. In 2013, he covered the 8,000 square feet of the roof garden of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York with his violent blood splashes and delicate, intricate blossoms. He'd been sitting in the Lahore airport waiting to board the flight to New York when he heard about the Boston Marathon bombing. And he was so struck by this news that he created a sharp finish line between his work and the clean section of the rooftop to commemorate the incident. So now I want to share with you another artist who again is one of the early, another one of the trailblazers, and that is Nusra Latif Qureshi, whose works you see here on my right. Now, Nusra also graduated from the National College of Art, and she completed her MFA at the University of Melbourne, and she presently works and lives in Melbourne, Australia. In her artwork, she makes use of metaphors from the colonial past, layered with current scenes to emphasize erasures and insertions in historical narratives. The first work that we want to share with you is called Right Catch. They are faint contours of Mughals that are overlaid with outlines of colonial figures from a group photograph from the British Raj. She also has incorporated the images of extinct animals and birds from company paintings as another symbol of loss from overhunting and disease in colonial times. The triptych that I'm going to share with you next is titled Gold, Green, Orange, Rules of Warfare. The colors, gold, green, and orange, are the colors of the Mughal flag. The sword, which was an important part of royal regalia, is no ordinary sword. If you look closely, the hilt has a horse's head. It's an imperial sword. The water pitcher is used in religious rituals, Hindu and Muslim. And the riderless horse signifies the fallen warrior. Now, those of you who are familiar with Mughal history will understand the imagery. The succession to the throne was usually decided by wars among the siblings. And often, the loser was killed. In some cases, he was beheaded.
Thank you, Shireen, for sharing with us some of these trailblazers of the neo-miniaturists and how the revival starts taking place, especially in the late 20th century. And of course, you mentioned two people in particular that are significant, Shazia Sikandar and Nusra Latif Qureshi. And as you'll see, and if you come and visit us here in Chicago, you'll also see that we have many women artists here. So I guess my question for Shireen is, what is the role of women artists currently in this neo-miniaturist movement? And what was the role of women artists in the traditional miniature movement? So why don't we go over to Shireen and talk to her about that?
So you're right, Asad. Historically, miniature art was a male-dominated discipline. The skill passed from father to son. And women were not only not educated, but they were not taught the art form because they would take the knowledge outside the gharana or the family when they got married. Now, there are a few documented works by 3 Mughal princesses. So we know that there was some art education within the imperial quarters or the zanana, the space that was reserved for women. The feminist movement, though, was a boon for art education worldwide. And at the NCA too, there were several women faculty. There was the activist and feminist Lala Rukh that I mentioned earlier. There was Salima Hashmi, who herself is the daughter of the activist poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz. And these women were very active in the women's rights movement. And as a result, they attracted many young women to the institution. And we have several artists, women artists, featured in this exhibition. And they use their work to bring attention to the issues related to identity and sexuality, politics, and history. The work in the background is the work that I'm going to share with you. And this is by the artist Faiza Butt. Faiza studied at the National College of Art and obtained her MFA from Slade after that. Now she lives and works in London currently. And she has a unique technique, which is a hybrid of the Pardakht or the pointillist miniature technique and pixel structure of photographs. And the works that we're showing here, she has created on polyester film. The first one is titled God's Best. And you see it here behind me. There are 3 radical images of contemporary boxers. The 2 on either side, hyper-masculine males, symbols of heroism and power jutting out of cakes like trophies. And the third, a cloaked figure in the middle that portrays another common male image, that of the religious male who claims to be the savior of the faithful. Now, the other work, which is next to it, is actually, it's titled The End Has No End, and it's actually a light box. And we will show you the images of what it looks like, both lit and unlit. The artist has used the images of quote unquote men in suits to discuss the credibility that's ascribed to a man in a Western suit. While historically women are portrayed either as the long-suffering Madonna or a whore. And the title is totally unrelated. She listens to music while she works, and it's a reference to the lyrics of a song by that name by the Strokes. Now, I'm also going to introduce you to Aisha Khalid, another woman artist who studied at the National College of Art and then went on to the Rijksacademy in Amsterdam. And in her work, she brings attention to gender inequality by making use of the theme of the covered female figure. And in the work in the exhibition, she actually uses a curtain. And in this work that's titled Change of Course, she's used repeated geometrical patterns to make reference to repeated copying and traditional works that are being taught at the National College of Art, and the resistance to allowing any exploration of new expression. The next female artist that we're going to look at, whose work is in this exhibition, is Talha Rator. And Talha is a graduate of the National College of Art and lives and works in New York City. And although Manhattan and miniature art are 2 very opposite entities, she feels that she connects them through her works. And in this work that's titled New Degrees of Separation and Togetherness, she's painted it on a New York City subway map, which she used to help navigate the city as a young immigrant. The trees represent connectedness to the earth and to one's roots. And I think it's ironic that she chose the cypress, which is actually a symbol of immortality.
Thank you again, Shireen, for talking to us about the important role and really the leading role that women artists have been playing in this new movement of miniature art, as well as talking to us a little bit about who is kind of the significant artists, who are the significant artists that have been a part of this movement, and walking us through that. Now, as you were doing that, there were certain themes that kept kind of reoccurring or different themes that kept coming up. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the themes and the issues that the neo-miniaturists, as if you may, are exploring in their work?
So the contemporary miniature artists explored their reactions to political and social injustices and religious and cultural taboos in their paintings. They're usually not overt statements, but done with a lot of symbolism and satire. And this may not be readily apparent to the outsider who's unaware of that context or the traditional imagery. Some of the works in this exhibition are a perfect example to that. The first artist that I want to share with you is Saira Vasim. Now, she probably makes the boldest statements, but it's usually with a lot of satire and humor. Saira graduated from the National College of Art, and she currently lives in Boston. She uses intricate, painstaking miniature gouaches to comment about contemporary global political and social issues. In the work that's titled Identity, she comments about Muslim Americans who are peaceful and law-abiding citizens, but a car bomb in New York City aggravated the bias against the community's reputation, which had already been damaged by 9/11. The next work is titled Flirting with Fate. Now in this work, there is a religious cleric and his companion who are flying to heaven on 2 rams. And their voyage is under a canopy that bears a human skull, addressing the fascination of militants with death and destruction in the name of faith. Now, the next artist that we're going to talk about is Khadim Ali. And Khadim Ali studied at the National College of Art prior to earning his MFA at the University of New South Wales in Australia, where he lives and works now. Now, Khadim belongs to the Shia Hazara ethnic minority from Afghanistan. And he and his family fled to Pakistan to escape religious persecution by the Taliban. And his grandfather was a teacher and a storyteller. And as a young man, Ali grew up listening to him reciting tales from the ancient Persian epic known as the Shahnameh, or the Book of Kings. And in this book, the hero Rustam encounters demons and heroes and characters with mythical powers. Ironically, the hero Rustam was appropriated by the Taliban. So in Ali's works that you see here to my right, they're titled the Rustam series, but Rustam is a horned demon with a long beard reminiscent of the Taliban fighters. And the 2 other works titled The Forlorn Foe is a later version. And again, you see the same imagery.
Thank you, Shireen, for talking to us about that artists are exploring. And we actually had 2 more artists, but we're looking at time. And as I'm even hearing this, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. We're seeing a lot of comments in the chat. So we want to make sure that we're dedicating enough time to all of your questions so we're able to answer them. So there are other artists that are exploring important social and political themes. And this is the time when I'm going to encourage everyone to come visit us in Chicago. If you're here already, we're open. And the exhibition itself is open till the end of February. So even if you can't make it now, hopefully when the pandemic is closer to being more manageable, you can come and check out our exhibition in person. But we're also happy to take any questions and discuss over email as needed. and we'll give you that information near the end. Now that we've heard about who's making the art, we've heard about some of the issues or the topics and the themes that are being explored within this art, I'm sure you're wondering a little bit about the techniques as well. We did mention that there's this traditional technique of creating miniature paintings, but why don't we talk a little bit about the tradition and what people are doing that's innovative and new as they're exploring miniatures once again. So for that, I'm going to ask Afzal to join us and talk a little bit about technique.
Thank you, Asad. Welcome again, and I'm going to discuss about the original techniques and some of the variations of the newer techniques. And behind me, there's a wall that details in extraordinary detail the different methodology that are employed by these ateliers, where the bulk of these miniatures were made. There was a master or the ustad, and then the pupils, and pupils usually were younger. They did most of the work because they had better eyesight than the older ustads. Old classical way of painting is done on a Wasli paper. And Wasli paper is a handmade paper made of multiple layers glued together with flour impregnated with copper sulfate as an insecticide. The paper was then cut and polished with glass or seashell to get a smooth surface. All pigments and paints were procured from nature, either in the form of vegetable dyes or animal products or crushed semi-precious stones, metals like silver and gold. And curiously, the yellow color was obtained by collecting and concentrating the urine of cows that have been fed either mangoes or the leaves of the mango tree for months. The brushes were made from the animal hair, especially the squirrel hair, because it was so fine, and they had to sometimes use to paint with one single hair from squirrel. Slowly, the technique of making miniature paintings are changing with onset of newer printing and software technology. Here we will discuss a number of artists who have developed their own unique style. All these artists are graduates of NCA College. And behind me, you will see this image of Imran Chana. He was an NCA graduate, and he used digital printing techniques on paper as his technique to print some of these miniatures. And he used to question the classical old history books where the patrons dictated the way the history was written. He also is questioning the technique that is held sacred and unique by the diehard miniaturists. Here in this large work, it depicts his interpretation of Death of Lodi. It is a take on the scene in Badshahnameh of Emperor Shah Jahan. He leaves the area of the image that is not authenticated blank. Now there are other smaller paintings by the same artist also, but I want you to walk with me and come to this place over here where behind me are two artists, one Rashid Rana, the other Muhammad Zeeshan. And Rashid Rana is the first painting with the dead bird flying. And he's presently the Dean of Fine Arts, Department of Beacon House University in Lahore, and has developed a technique using a novel computer software program, making photo montages and photo mosaics from small pixelated images that he puts together with this computer program, which are totally opposite to the whole montage. In this work titled Dead Bird Flying, the micro images consist of multiple of bird cages in those small images, and that are so prevalent in the rooftops of Lahore's inner old city. The other person depicted on my left side, the larger image, is by Muhammad Zeeshan. In this work and the triptych on the other side of the wall, which you will see presently, is called The Dying Miniature. And he challenges the tradition of painting a miniature. Unlike a regular painter, miniature painting, he has replaced a smooth Wasli with rough sandpaper and delicate squirrel hair brushes with graphite and colorful details of a typical miniature with monochromatic silver regal silhouettes. Both of these works are very large in size compared to the others in the exhibit, and that's what I was talking about initially when I talked about some of these images. Some of these works are huge. The only element that is common with a miniature is the subject matter. And in this image, first image, you'll see a regal figure with a gun in his hand. And the triptych on the other side is based on 15th century Ragmala series miniature depicting a group of entertainers.
Thank you for talking to us about the techniques and a little bit about how people are innovating now. If you walk with me, you'll see that there's this entire wall of many more contemporary artists. We simply just don't have the time to go through everyone. So we're gonna bring this conversation to a close. We're gonna talk about a couple of more artists, and then we're gonna get right into your questions. So thank you for being with us thus far. And I guess the couple of the questions that I do wanna ask is, one, about this idea of globalization, because even, starting 500 years ago with miniatures, it was affecting the world, it was being influenced by the world. And we still see that in the art today, of course. So if we can quickly talk about maybe Farhat Ali, whose work is kind of interesting and influenced, and then we'll switch over to what influences are still taking place in Europe and with the British artists that we have.
Graduate from NCA also, and in his representation of a 17th century Mughal miniature, Muslim prince Baz Bahadur and Hindu consort Rupmati riding together on a horse. And that's an unusual image in the sense that usually each horse has one rider, but here they're riding together. And this is a very famous love story during Akbar's time. And on the horse that he is riding is decked with Disney characters using symbolism and elements of storytelling to convey a deeper message. Similarly, in other smaller works by the same artist on display behind us, depicted other Hindu myths with the use of the Disney character symbols.
Now, Shireen, if you could talk to us a little bit about, in particular, the two British artists whose work we have as well, but also the idea that there was this conversation between places around the globe back when we were looking at traditional miniatures, as well as, of course, contemporary miniatures.
Excellent way to wind up the tour, Asad, because we actually come full circle then. While the Europeans denigrated the traditional art of the subcontinent, they appropriated boatloads of magnificent works that now lie in royal collections and in museums all over Europe. And many of the Mughal miniatures that made their way to Europe served as models for the European artists like Rembrandt and Schellings and others. And this globalization continues to this day. And I wanted to conclude this morning by sharing a couple of works by two British artists who've adopted the traditional miniature style. Both of these artists apprenticed with miniature artists in Jaipur in India, where the descendants of the traditional Pahari painters have established workshops. And they continue to produce paintings in the traditional style, but mostly for tourist consumption. So the first artist, the small work behind me, that's Jethro Buck, who graduated from the Prince School of Traditional Arts in London before he went to India. And this work is an exploration and a celebration of nature. It's titled Do Tigers Dream? And it's painted using oil paint on gilded paper. And it was painted after a visit to a tiger reserve where he tells me they saw no tigers during his honeymoon. Now, the next artist that we're going to share with you, that's Alexander Golitsky. Now, he graduated from Slade in London, and he lives and works in New York. And he has established an atelier in very similar to the Mughal atelier in Jaipur. Golitsky focuses on creating the drawings in New York, while his team of assistants in Jaipur apply the pigments and the gold leaf. And together they recontextualize the paintings using elements of whimsy and fantasy and a bit of surrealism. And this work by Golitsky is titled The Big Day. Now, there are other miniaturists in the US and in Europe who are adopting and experimenting with the technique as well, just as the earlier Europeans did. I want to end now and tell you all, how pleased we are to, both Afzal and myself. It's been a pleasure for both of us to share a small portion of this exhibition with you this morning. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you in person in the near future. And I'm going to turn it back over to Asad.
Thank you, Shireen, for that. And also thank you to our team. We have Jonathan, Ludwig, and Aruj from the South Asia Institute team that have been obviously extremely helpful and help us produce this whole thing. We are taking your questions now. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. That's probably the easiest way. Somebody will send them to me on my phone. And I will start with the ones that we have so far. And I also want to thank Alexa from Creative Mornings for helping us put this together, and just Creative Mornings in general for doing these field trips all around the globe at a time when we can't really visit in the same way that we would want to. So the first question is pretty easy to answer. Is there a catalog for the exhibition if you cannot visit in person? And of course, there will be. There isn't right now, and we'll put that information on our website. If you're interested in anything specific, please feel free to email us, info@saichicago.org, or go to our website, saichicago.org. We're on social media on all the channels. So please feel free to engage in that way. If you are in Chicago, we're open right now because of the pandemic on Thursdays and Fridays from 11 to 6. Soon we're hoping to expand to Saturdays as well. And if there's any time you want to come by and just drop us an email, maybe we can arrange something as well. The second question is, can you please hold another talk with different art and exhibitions?
Hopefully, and we'll gauge the interest from our art goers and art lovers, and hopefully we should be able to put in another exhibit, another tour of the miniature, but representing different artists. And
I want to add that nothing replaces seeing the work itself in person, and we'd love to see you all here. We do accept small groups currently, and we're happy to work with anybody who wants to come and visit in person.
I'm just going to take a second to answer because I know there's a little sound issue. But there's a question about, is there social media presence? Of course there is. SAI_Chicago on Instagram. You can look us up, South Asia Institute Chicago, on Facebook as well. We're also on Twitter, on LinkedIn. We do have a YouTube channel with some interesting videos from our SAI at Home series. So please make sure to tune into all of those. There's another question that's a good question. Are there significant, they're all good questions of course, but another good question. Are there significant collections of miniatures at other museums? I've seen some in Udaipur, but would be curious about collections here in the US that might be easier to visit right now.
So I think it's going to be unusual for you to find this sort of a collection in a museum here in the US, because most museums are still featuring the traditional miniatures. Most of the collections still have a fair number of those works. The biggest collections, of course, are in the UK and in Europe. We're beginning to see contemporary South Asian art and contemporary South Asian miniatures in the mainstream museums. So you might find an odd one or two or three. Shazia, for example, is at the Met and at Whitney, at museums in Texas, and she's had exhibitions all over. The same thing for Imran, his works, Nusra is another artist. So you find selected works. We hope that eventually there will be a bigger interest, but to find this many works, to find 100 miniatures is very unusual.
So continuing on, another question is that you must have used your critical eye when collecting these neo-miniatures. Can you talk about what aspects of neo-miniature painting you take into account before acquiring a particular work?
Question. Other than a couple of works in this exhibition that were loaned to us by another collector, the majority of the works that you see today are from our personal collection. And it's an interesting story, and I'll try and condense it to a few minutes. The collection really started very innocently. It started with acquiring works to put on our walls in our home. And at the time when we started, we couldn't afford good American art or European art. We couldn't afford it. And but what resonated with us was South Asian art. And so the initial collection was mostly moderns. And that was our last exhibition that we had here. We had moderns from South Asia. I have to admit that initially, because we lived in this country, at that time there was no internet, I'm talking 20 years ago, we were kind of out of touch with the politics and the social scene. Some of the initial works that we saw by contemporary artists, we didn't even understand what we were looking at. For us, it was very important to meet artists, and we've done this all along as we've collected. We've interacted with the artists. And as we began to do that, and again, the internet helped a lot because we were in touch with the news of what was happening. We knew what they were depicting. And so the messages are very interesting. I think it's the messages of a lot of these works that really excites us and that has caused us to acquire them.
I may add that in the beginning, when we were collecting the modern art, we really did not understand the contemporary art, because each contemporary art has a message, a symbolism, or some kind of a story behind it. And unless you get to know what it's all about, it's not a pretty face anymore like you see in some of the modern paintings or so. And also at that time, living outside the country, we didn't have access to some of the things that were going on. And as you know, the South Asian history, recent history, being full of turmoil and angst. And as you know, whenever the angst is the worst, the quality of the images is going to be the best, because that's when the real artistic quality of an artist comes through. So we've seen that because a region of South Asia called Pakistan has gone through such a turmoil with the Taliban and Afghanistan issues, and a lot of killing and a lot of other social issues. The angst is much more over there, and you'll see the art and the literature is of a much better quality than any other cities or state in the region.
Keep them coming. One of these is asking about, I'm so in love with the miniatures and would like to integrate the techniques into my future works. Where can we learn these specific techniques?
not being an academic myself, you know, I'm not academic. I hate to make a statement, but I think the best place where you can acquire knowledge about the technique would probably be the National College of Art. They have a full-scale curriculum. It starts with a couple of years where you actually learn the technique, and then you're challenged by the younger artists on the younger faculty members. And there's a lot more freedom now for expression. And so I think that's probably where one gets the best training and knowledge. You'll also get a lot of academic, you know, a lot of instruction there, academic instruction. There are several workshops in India where people are spending time with some of the descendants of these old miniature artists, and they're acquiring good training there too, but of course not with any of the background.
I would totally agree. If you like to
We can't quite hear yet.
regular miniature,
Afzal, they can't hear you yet. Just wait 1 second.
yeah, so if it depends on whether you are interested in being challenged by the contemporary scene or typical antique miniature scene. India, Jaipur, and certain other cities are very good about learning the basic classical technique of miniature making. But if you're interested in being challenged, Lahore is the city, and there are 2 or 3 big universities. Shireen mentioned about the National College of Art, which is of course the oldest and the most well-known, but there's a Beacon House University that I mentioned to you about, whose chair is Rashid Rana, and there's a lot of good work coming out of that institution as well. And then of course, there are a lot of retired old miniature painters who are doing work outside the university, and they could be a good person to talk to or have conversation with.
Combine 2 that are kind of different. One is very specific. Were artists making their own squirrel brushes, and did they keep their own animals to make the mango fed pigment? That's one. The other question is, when you acquire the art, do you go through individual artists or do you connect with galleries abroad? And how can someone build their own collection of South Asian art?
So to answer the first question, that was about, I think it's probably difficult for the artists to have been, you know, raising their own animals and so on or you know, to get their yellow pigment, but I have no idea how they did that. I'm sure with the size of the Mughal ateliers, there must have been people who found it quite a good investment financially to raise the animals and, you know, create the pigment, you know, dry the urine and whatever went into the into the process of creating that yellow color. There was another question there was another part of that question. But as far as collecting, I think there are galleries now, both in India and Pakistan and in Europe, in London. London is another great place. The auction houses is another place where you'll find works. So now there's many sources. The fun part about getting to know the artist and learning about the work is what we have found interesting. Even after we've purchased something or gotten something in an auction, there's usually not much of an explanation. And when you look at a work, it kind of makes you wonder what they were thinking about when they did that particular work. And we've often gone back to the artist and said, what were you thinking? Or what does this really mean? And it's surprising sometimes what we've found out, because the message is never really overt.
I think first part of the equation in any collection that you want to acquire is the education. You have to educate yourself first as to what tugs at your heart. Some people like old classical miniatures, which are antique, 100 to 300, 400 years old. But I think the contemporary miniatures are much more unique in the sense that they have a message, and then you can relate to that, and you can explore that message by talking to the maker of that image, usually the artist. But again, coming back to the raising the animal and the yellow pigment, in fact, in the olden days, and I'm talking about Mughal Empire, there used to be a regular industry where whole villages used to feed cows the mangoes and the leaves of the mango tree, and they used to collect that. And in fact, some of these cows were found to have some kind of issue with their urinary tract after a while because of the fact that they were being fed by mango leaves also. And these pigments, after they were concentrated and dried, they actually were shipped out to Europe as well for the use of the yellow pigment in European printmaking, and not printmaking, but the image making. So it regularly was an industry, full-fledged industry, very profitable industry, and certain areas of the country were very prominent in carrying out this industry, and there were a lot of people involved in exporting that item to different countries as well.
Thanks again to the South Asia Institute team and Creative Mornings. I think that's a great little interesting tidbit to end on, because you never know what you're going to learn when you come to an exhibition at South Asia Institute or learn about miniatures. We have a really exciting 2021 planned, as well as some exciting programs for the rest of the year. The best way to stay tuned to that is just to be on our social media. You can also go to our website and sign up for our email list. Again, we are a new 501c3 nonprofit, navigating our way through the pandemic, just like all of you. So we're really thankful that you could join us for this virtual tour, and so that we could feel that our walls and the art is really appreciated in ways that it's become difficult to do so in person. So thank you once again, everyone, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you for joining this Zoom session.
And thank you to Creative Mornings and our team here. We couldn't have done this without them.